Okay, week 12, Monday, finally getting into our book. Um, I just wanted to go over, I didn't really go over it before, just, let you know that it existed, but just wanted to remind you that under week 11, Friday is the In Cold Blood reading schedule. Now, obviously, you can see in Canvas when the quizzes are because, you'll see the quizzes there. But if you need like a, finite schedule, then here are all the dates, and those dates are pretty set. If I move one thing, then everything has to move, and it becomes a mess. So I'm going to try and keep to this schedule and keep things the way that it is. For some of the longer sections, so like this is a pretty hefty chunk of pages. This one's a little bit on the longer side. You'll notice that the quiz dates are a little bit more spaced out to give you some more time to get through those sections. And then, of course, there's a bit of space for Thanksgiving, get a bit of a break there. But other than that, it's pretty rapid. A day, maybe two between quizzes, unless there's a long weekend somewhere in there. But yeah. So, anyways, that is the reading schedule. Now, the first thing I want to go over is some information about our author. But I also just do want to mention that since this is a nonfiction book, there's a lot of characters, like a lot of characters. There's only a few primary ones. You can get by with just knowing, a handful or so of folks. But since there are so many, people in the real life story, there's a lot of characters mentioned. So I have these character guides for each section of the book so that if they mention someone and you're like, who is that again? Then here is kind of an alphabetical guide of, who's who in the book. So, just in case you're getting people confused and you're like, oh, Teddy, that's so and so's best friend. And then you're like, oh, no, wait, that's a dog. So, yeah. Lots and lots of characters described in the book and mentioned in the book, which is more confusing. The other thing I do want to mention is the set of questions that goes along with the book. So we're primarily just doing reading quizzes, but for the first part of the book, I have some questions that focus very specifically on some more in-depth analysis questions related to diction, syntax, and figurative language. So that's not due until after part one is over, obviously, but just a thing to be aware of. The other thing that I'll be giving to A-Day students today that I tried to distribute to B-Day students last week is a little character Venn diagram, which you won't really be able to start now because you have to meet all the characters to know, what the similarities and differences are between them. But eventually that will be something we'll do that will be due around the end of part one as well. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to get into author information. Mr. Truman Capote, very interesting fella. So Truman Capote, and these are pictures of him at various points in his life. He was very eccentric, life of the party, very extroverted, flamboyant, very much a social creature, shall I say. So he lived, of course, back in a time when being gay was not really socially acceptable. So it was something that, people were aware of, but not necessarily something that, was celebrated maybe in the way that we might accept him today. But he was pretty famous for his literature. So he started writing at the age of 11. Breakfast at Tiffany's was one of his biggest hits. When he was working on In Cold Blood and crafting this nonfiction novel, he received a great deal of help from Harper Lee, Nell Harper Lee, who was his childhood friend and neighbor. Now, you may recall Harper Lee is the author of To Kill a Mockingbird. And the character of Dill in the book is actually based off of Truman Capote, the little crazy neighbor kid next door. So if you have familiarity with that book or movie, then you can probably get a sense of what Truman was like, his personality, quite a character. Truman Capote kind of credited himself, and most people acknowledge that he started this new genre, true crime, because crime had really been limited to shorter pieces before. Crime was something for the newspapers or the magazines, but a full-length true crime novel that was, successful commercially, that was a little bit of a anomaly. However, though the book was very successful, there are some issues. There were some protests. A lot of the people who were in the book didn't 100% agree with the way they were represented or the way that events were represented. Some people said Capote just straight up made some stuff up. So there's controversy about is this really nonfiction, or is this mostly nonfiction with some fiction flair in there to make it a good story? So it's unclear in some ways exactly what is truth and what might be a little bit of creative license on Truman Capote's part. There are some scenes that have explicitly been mentioned as being contested. Most of the book is accepted as truth. Maybe not the whole truth in some cases, but truth. But there are definitely a few scenes, and I'll point out one in particular that, the people involved said that definitely never happened. So little bit of artistic license there. So Capote, mostly, for most of his life, was romantically involved with Jack Dunphy, who was also a fellow writer. Jack was very different from Truman, much more introverted, much more quiet, much less of a partier, didn't crave attention in the same way that Truman Capote did. And unfortunately, Capote had some issues, some problems that Jack and his friend Nell Harper Lee tried to help him with. He became very heavily addicted to alcohol and drugs. Alcohol was a vice for much of his life, and it caught up to him in 1984. He died from liver cancer, thought to be caused by excessive alcohol consumption. So, looking at In Cold Blood, we talked about epigraphs with Fahrenheit 451. So we have another one for In Cold Blood. So if you're looking at your book and you find the page that has the title of part 1 on it, The Last to See Them Alive, very dramatic. If you flip a page back from that, you'll see this little French poem. And I kind of like the fact that Truman Capote did do it in French. Not that I speak French or anything, but the way that he made it kind of inaccessible, unless you took the time to research it or look into it or already had some knowledge of foreign languages, kind of this little sophisticated jab, little hint. So unless you read French, then I will do some translating and give you some contextualization. Ballade des Pendus is the French title of the poem. It translates to Ballad of the Hanged. So, kind of a dark little poem here. Now, Francois Villon was in jail at the time that he wrote this poem. He had been arrested for several attempts at robbery, as well as brawling and the death of a priest, in which he claimed self-defense. Times were crazy back then. And he was a medieval French poet, so very, very long time ago. So he wrote this poem while he was in jail. Parliament did later set aside the sentence and just settled with banishing him from Paris rather than executing him. But at the time he wrote this poem, he thought that he was going to be one of the hanged. He thought that he would be executed. So the translation of the piece is, brothers that live when we are dead, don't set yourself against us too. If you could pity us instead, then God may sooner pity you. So I find it incredibly fascinating that this book, which is about a murder, about the death of an innocent family, about the quest for the killers. This book that deals with such a dark subject should have this poem at the beginning of it that is asking for sympathy. It asks for pity. It is from the perspective of a criminal in jail, a criminal who is saying, after I'm dead, have pity for me, and perhaps God will pity you as well if you end up in a terrible, sinful situation. So it kind of makes you wonder right from the start, what is Capote's agenda? What is he trying to tell us with this poem? Should we feel sorry for the criminals who did this? The men who slaughtered this family? Should we feel pity for them? Should we feel sympathy for them? It's a very, very interesting epigraph. So that is how we begin the book, The Ballad of the Hanged. So then we get to the title of part 1, The Last to See Them Alive. Very, very dark title for part 1 of the book. And of course, the them in this case is presumably the Clutter family. So if you haven't looked at it already, I do just want to read the back of the book so that you have, a general idea of what to expect here. I don't want you to be horribly traumatized and shocked. So if you look at the back, it tells us that on November 15th, 1959, in the small town of Holcomb, Kansas, 4 members of the Clutter family were savagely murdered by blast from a shotgun held a few inches from their faces. There was no apparent motive for the crime, and there were almost no clues. As Truman Capote reconstructs the murder and the investigation that led to the capture, trial, and execution of the killers, he generates both mesmerizing suspense and astonishing empathy. In Cold Blood is a work that transcends its moment, yielding poignant insights into the nature of American violence. So, right from the get-go, the back, is a total spoiler, which, to be fair, this is nonfiction, it's history. Perhaps we shouldn't be shocked to find out, what happens in the end. So the point of this book is not the twists and the turns and the surprises necessarily, but it's really delving into the psyche of these killers and why they did what they did, and the process that leads to their eventual death. They die. They are executed, which, is fairly rare. In this time period, the death penalty was not widely used. So anyways, point being that we know right from the get-go, when we meet the Clutter family, they are going to die. We know how they're going to die. We know that they have been killed intentionally and savagely by multiple killers, more than one killer. And we know that these killers will be captured, they will go through trial, and they will be executed. The plot of the story is not a surprise, but the details that lead to the place where we end up, that's where the interesting bit is. And the way that Truman Capote tells this story is quite interesting. It's nonfiction, but he adds elements of narrative into it. He adds elements of rhetoric into it, because we can tell right from the get-go that he is trying to persuade us of something, that even though these killers were caught and hanged, maybe we should feel sorry for them too. Ultimately, I don't think that he wants us to leave off reading this book and be like, good for them, they got what they deserved. He wants us to find some sympathy in our hearts somehow. So, we shall see as you read this book if you are persuaded. So, how I plan on doing this book, since I really was very kind and, kind of held your hand through Fahrenheit 451 one and read all the things to you. Whether you chose to have them read to you during remote days was, of course, up to you, but now I'm giving you less choice. So when we are in class, so when you physically attend class and we have a quiz and some reading that's due the next day, I will give you a choice. For the physical students in class, if they indicate that they would like to kind of try and read the section together and talk through some things, then I do think that reading together sometimes can be a valuable tool that we can learn things from discussing with each other. But by the same token, I do think that eventually you do need to get to the point where you're able to do a lot of those things independently. So I will not be reading any of the sections virtually. Now, I will discuss them after the fact. So as you can see, this is the first quiz. There's your access code, and the access code will be the same for all the quizzes. I only have it there just because I know you're used to it, and I don't want you to, accidentally start before you're ready. But point being that for the students who are not physically in class today, I'm going to ask you to read pages 3 through 13 all by yourselves. And obviously, if you read through and you are, getting lost or confused, or you have questions, email me, contact me. I'm happy to talk about things and try and, help get things going. But I will also offer a compromise. I will make sure to discuss each section of the book in the following day's video. So I won't read it, but I will kind of point out important things, talk about language, talk about word choice, talk about sentence structure, talk about characters and characterization, just kind of go over the important stuff. It's one of those things where, like, if you haven't read, it may be kind of hard to follow, but if you have read, hopefully it will just reinforce what's important. So if you read the section and you feel good, you feel confident, then just go ahead and take the quiz. And, afterwards you can decide if you want to kind of listen to me talk about the section. If you read the section and you're like, I don't know, I'm kind of confused, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be paying attention to in this section or what to take away from it, watch the next day's YouTube video. And that way you'll be like, okay, I think I get it now. I understand what's important. And hopefully you'll just be able to crush the quiz really easily. Now, if every time you're going to take a quiz, you're watching the next day's YouTube video, then that's maybe not much better than having me read the whole thing to you. So at some point, do try to, challenge yourself to step away from, being dependent on listening to me talk and explain about it. You guys are very smart individuals, and you do need to, work those brains and work those neurons and create those connections so that you are able to analyze things independently. That's a skill that, we're trying to develop throughout this whole year. So anyways, those are my compromises, is that you will have to take the quiz on pages 3 through 13 without me reading the beautiful words on the page. You'll have to read them with your own eyes. But if you are still lost or confused, then you can always kind of check out the next day's video to hear me talk about the section to help you interpret, especially as we're, getting going and getting things off the ground. So anyways, since this is Monday's video and there's nothing from yesterday to discuss, that's about all I have for today. So B-Day students, make sure to take this quiz. A-Day students are going to take it in class. So A-Day students will get to decide whether they want to read together or whether they want to just kind of read independently. The quizzes are not meant to be challenging. They are typically 10 questions or less, typically 10 minutes or less. They are timed. And the time is designed so that, you do actually have to read. You will not do as well on the quizzes if you don't read. You may get lucky and get some right, by guessing or by like some mad fast skimming, but reading the section will benefit you, I promise. So the quizzes are open book, they are timed, and they are not meant to be incredibly difficult. Some of the questions are detailed. I am allowing you to use your book, so I feel like that's fair to ask some specific questions. But they're all very, very findable in the time that you have, assuming that you have actually read the pages. So in pages 3 through 13, you will get to meet the town of Holcomb, Kansas. You'll hear a little bit about some members of the Clutter family, and then you will take the quiz and hopefully crush. And if you read and you're confused, then watch this video. Okay, that's all.